like? Grandma Duffy's?
The Murphys?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, is
And
it
don't
ready?
put your hand on your
Yeah, it's
mouth
on.
because
Okay.
put a little more
We're on.
lipstick on.
We are?
We're on.
Well, they're asking me a little bit more about Grandma Duffy.
Mary Murphy.
Grandpa and Grandma Duffy were both Irish on both sides.
Uh-huh.
My Grandma Duffy was Mary
Murphy, wasn't it?
Yes, Mary Murphy. She was, and they called her May. Everybody called her May Duffy. Her parents were both Irish. Her grandmother, her mother and father's name was Jordan. Mary Jane Jordan was Bob's grandmother, and he just loved her. And that's where Mary Jane got her name. It's from Mary Jane Jordan. She was Bob's grandmother. And,
Was she a nice old lady?
oh yeah, she's as sweet as could be. She died when Michael and Pam were babies. She knew them. She knew Michael and that. But I didn't know, ever know Grandma Duffy's father. Grandma Duffy had two sisters and one brother, and so that's the story.
So they were Irish. You tell us real quickly your parents' background, Ingo and Deuce-Bobby. Where did
Well,
they come from?
Grandpa Deuce-Bobby and Grandma Deuce-Bobby came from Austria-Hungary. So when they spoke German, that was the German dialect in that area. They were born in Austria-Hungary. And my dad's father, I never did find out what his mother was, but his father was German, and I guess, yeah, that's as far as I know. That's what their nationality was. He when my dad, when his mother was ill, they had to put her in a state home for the mentally ill, and she got over it, after a while, after being in there. And my dad was her guardian, and he'd go to see her all the time. And I can remember we drive. She was at Rochester, Minnesota. There was a insane asylum. I might as well say it. That's what it was. She.
We got nuts in the background.
Anyway, God bless her. She wanted to come home. Every time you'd go over there, she'd start to cry. I want to go home. I want to go home. So my dad took her home. My mother was good. She took her in and took care of her. And after she was there for a little while, she wanted to go back. That was her whole life. She'd been there even though she got over her mental disorder or whatever it was, that was her whole life.
Comfort zone there.
Her comfort zone, she wanted to go back, and that's where he died. My dad, looked after her. We drive over there to see her. I can remember going over when I was a little girl to visit her, and that's when we drove over there. I think we were living in Blooming Prairie, so I was pretty young. My memories of that aren't that good.
Okay.
Because I was only 6 or 7 years old. But I can remember going over to see her.
When was Anne born? Now,
Where?
Mike was born in...
Anne was born,
was Dad out of the service?
yes, Anne was born the first year that after Dad got out of service, and she was born in 1946 in Austin, Minnesota, and we had finally found a little apartment there, and it was 1 bedroom and a bath and a living room and a small little kitchen that wasn't much bigger than a closet. oh my, we were just so happy to have it. It was a new little house that they cut in two and divided it into 2 apartments. And how Bob found out about it, the girl that was the secretary at the place at Decker Hardware where Bob was working at the time, she told him, he says, there's somebody moving out, gonna move out of there, and you get in touch with the landlord and maybe you can get it. Well, we were just overjoyed because that was just shortly before Ann was born. And I said, I always feel like I marked Ann with how easy it is for her to cry because I never cried so much in my life. I really didn't, it was sad.
Why did you
of
cry?
Because of, him coming back, and it was a hard adjustment for him. And we had to live with,
Another couple?
well, with my mother and Bernadine and Ike and and Maureen and Michael and in a small apartment. And
Your mom and dad didn't have a house?
my mother, when my dad died, we moved to Austin. They had a lot they were going to build. He was going to retire. They were going to, well, she never wanted to build a house. She never wanted to do anything after Dad died. She lived with Bernadine and Emily and I for 15 years. She'd go from one to the other.
Well, she just must have been horribly brokenhearted when her husband died.
Yeah. Well, we did have an apartment, that we lived together because the boys were overseas. And and she never got used to living alone because there she had Bernadine and I and our 2 babies, and we lived together in Austin. And
So
she
she-
never did build her home. They sold the lot and she never built a home.
She ever get her own place, or did she always just go between
She
the
just
babies?
lived with us, I said. She lived from one to the other of us. We took care of her, Bernadine, Emily, and I. She lived, with, so that's the story on it. It was not easy, then she'd come to visit. She came and helped me. Every time one of my children was born, she'd be there to help. And she'd go from Bernadine to me because we were having babies about the same time. Some of the kids are about the same ages.
And Annie was born when you moved into the new apartment.
When that little apartment, she was born just, we weren't even in there a month and she was born. And I remember, maybe a week or 2. I remember I had a rug or something that we bought from Emily that she didn't want, that we could put down on the floor. And I was down on my hands and knees scrubbing that rug so it'd be nice and clean when we put it down in that apartment. And I think the doctor went by or heard about it, and he says that's what brought the baby on, that I was, the moving and all that. So we didn't even have a car then. And for me to go to the hospital, Bob and I walked. I felt the pains coming. I thought, well, I had to go. So we took the suitcase and we walked to the hospital. And we got there, and I was there for a short while. The doctor came and looked, and he says, it's a false alarm. You go back home. So here we walked back home through the neighborhood, and everybody looked out in the suitcase, and we didn't come with any baby. We came walking home, and I was still had. So then a few days later, the pain started again, and boy, when you were ready to come, Bob thought there was nothing to it. That baby's, it was real easy because when I had you, I wasn't in the hospital more than about 3 or 4 hours, and you were born.
At 3:09 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing to it. Let's hear Bob.
And that's what Bob says. Oh, I told him how much I suffered with Mike. I was almost 2 days in labor, or a day and a half at least. He thought there was nothing to it, that I was making it up because the animal was so easy. When she decided to come, she decided to come.
That's right. Part of it too was probably, now we know, the fact that you exercised, you walked, and you were working hard,
Yeah,
probably more than you did before. That will bring on labor.
yeah, that's what happened, that's right.
You
So
like-
anyway, then, yeah, there we were in that little house, that little apartment, just one bedroom. Michael slept on the Davenport, and we had a baby bed, and you were in it. Well, while we were there, we had Georgie. We were still in that little apartment.
How long was it between Mom and Georgie?
2 years. Well, not
Now,
quite
Georgie was born in 48, and Ann was born in 46.
Okay.
Or
So,
before May 5th,
Ann was, then
1948.
Ann graduated
almost 2 years.
to the baby bed, and Georgie was in the bassinet between the baby bed and our bed. That's how small that room was, you know, three of it. 1, 2, 3.
Oh my God.
And Michael slept on the Davenport in the living room. That's where we were. Well, then Bob got a job as manager of a hardware store someplace. I can't remember where it was. And somehow or another, he didn't like it there. And he came back, and he got a job selling ware of aluminum, going door to door, selling ware of aluminum.
Well, aluminum siding for a house then.
Frying, you know, the
Frying pan.
frying
Frying
pan
pan.
dish, ware of
Pots and pans.
aluminum,
Okay.
you know, cooking utensils. His brother was working for a wholesale hardware company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he just said, Bob, he said, you come over here and put in your application. He said, I bet you could get a job as a hardware salesman. Well, he applied, and because of his background, he worked for so many years at Decker Hardware there in Austin for his brother, his uncle. They hired him as a hardware salesman. So then, where did we move?
Dyersville.
Oh, we moved to Dyersville. And of course, while Bob was overseas, he sent home every penny that he made. He'd keep maybe $5 or $10 or something to spend for spending money, and he sent everything else home. I saved the whole thing. My mother and dad wouldn't take a penny, you know, when I was living with them. And so, you just buy the baby's food, you know, if you want to do that, then you buy the baby's food, but that was all. So, I saved every penny as a result. I think we had $5,000 or $6,000 that I saved up. I never spent it. I'd keep maybe $25 a month for spending money. A lot of the girls, when their husbands sent money home, they bought sterling silver, they bought this, that, and the third thing, you know. I saved every penny. So we had a nest egg. And so then Bob bought a car. It was Plymouth. You know, when they had the first cars that came out, and they had a small little seat in the back. It was a coupe, but there was a seat back of the front seat. I don't know how to explain it, but it looked like a coupe. Well, anyway, we bought that, and that's what he drove for a short while.
How much would you say that cost? Did you still have a lot of the 5,000 left?
No, he bought it from Larry Dano. It was during the war. You couldn't buy a car, so it was a used car. And I think we spent about $3,000.
That's an outrageous amount of money to spend.
Yes, it is. It seems like it is. It was whatever it was.
Even at that
It's good
time.
for-
Whatever it was for that time, it was outrageous. But I can't remember just the exact figure of what it was.
So
But
that's
I
secured your
remember
nest egg?
Francis, Bob's brother, saying, well, Larry Dano was your best friend. Now, how come, you know, he didn't have to go to war. He didn't have to go like you did. Now, and then when he gets back, he sells you a car and holds it up for a high price, you know, or whatever. He had a fit about that. But he didn't drive that car too long, and he bought a brand new Ford. That was the first.
But Larry Dana was his best friend, or was it the other guy that was his best friend?
Not
Larry
anymore.
Dana was his best friend.
Larry Dana ripped him off on the car. I'll have to remember
Yeah.
that.
So anyway, we were
Well,
living in
suspect is
Dyersville for about 2 or 3 years, And then Patrick was born when we lived in Dyersville. It was, we had Michael and we lived in the only place you couldn't find an apartment there in Dyersville either. But the people that owned this tavern built a house because right after the war, they could build a house. So they built a house, and then they rented that apartment that they had over the tavern to us. And we thought that was pretty neat that we had that. And it was a nice little apartment. It was 2 bedrooms and a living room and a big kitchen, and then down the basement below the tavern I washed clothes, and then it had a back stairway you could go out there. Anyway, then we found a house to rent, and but Patrick was born in December, and my mother came to stay with us, and it was right before Christmas, and I felt so bad because I thought, well, now he's going to, I'm going to have that baby, and I won't be home for Christmas. But Patrick came on December 12th, so
That's 1950.
I did get home for Christmas. But when I brought him home from the hospital, Ann and Georgie had gotten chicken pox from someplace.
Oh.
I don't know where. And I didn't know it, and they didn't know it. They broke out after I got home. And as a result, we never thought that Patrick would get chicken pox. But he did. I only saw a couple pox, and they were in the diaper area that he had. But he did get the chicken pox.
That could have killed him.
It's true.
He was just a tiny baby.
Mom, wasn't there something about Pat's birth where the doctor?
Well, see, we lived, Dad insisted that I go to the hospital. He didn't,
Meaning Bob Duffy.
They had a doctor's office there in Dyersville where we lived, where everybody in Dyersville, he had a couple rooms, and, they have him there at his little hospital or whatever it was. No, I had to go to the hospital in Dubuque, Iowa, which was 30 miles away. So I thought the baby was on the way, and so we drove to Dubuque. And we got to Dubuque, and all of a sudden the labor stopped. The doctor came and he examined me, and the nurses, and they said, well, you might as well go back to Dyersville, go home. She's not going to have this baby till morning. And I looked at him, and the doctor left then. He just turned around and left. It was at night. And I says, you don't go back to Dyersville, because I'm going to have that baby tonight. I can tell. I know the baby's going to be born. And with that, I wasn't there. The doctor, I guess, barely got home. And all of a sudden, I've had some good pushes, and Bob called the nurse in, and she took one look, and what she did is got me on a gurney and got me in there so I wouldn't know. Because, see, I'd never been in that hospital, and that doctor never saw me because the Dyersville doctor couldn't enter that hospital to deliver the baby. It had to be a doctor in there. They have privileges. So he turned me over to this other doctor. Well, anyway, I had that baby, and they put chloroform on my face and put me out, and that's the last I knew. And I was back in my room, and I was screaming, "Don't hold my baby back!" I knew they were holding the baby back so it wouldn't come there, so Bob would know, because that doctor wouldn't have got a dime because he didn't do anything. But they all vouched for it, that they had that he was there when I.
In other words, they probably delivered Pat.
Oh yes, the nurses delivered him.
Yeah.
And we tried to prove it because Bob says, I don't care, that doctor wasn't there, he didn't stay. I would rather the nurses had it, give it to them. They delivered it, but he didn't know. because he wasn't in the delivery room. They didn't let him in.
Yeah, no.
See, the baby was born right away, you know, so when I came to, I was still shouting, "Don't hold my baby back."
Oh.
So Pat was born under those.
Yeah, he just, when he wanted to come, he came. So that's how Pat was born.
So then after Pat was born, then.
We moved to Lancaster, Wisconsin, and because Bob's territory, they wanted him closer to Milwaukee, because he'd have to go in. So we moved there, and he still had the Iowa towns that he called on. While we were in Dyersville, I have to tell you this: he got sick, and I almost lost him.
Dad got sick?
Dad got sick. He got encephalitis. He came home and he was so sick, he didn't know, and you know, he wouldn't go to a doctor, just like when he died.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't go to a doctor, and he says, "Oh, I'm all right, I just got the flu. I'm all right." Well, they had a church carnival or something going on, and I took the kids and I went to that. And he slept all that day and all the next day. And I said, "Bob, you just, why don't you wake up? You just sleep." And finally he came out of it. And I got him to go to the doctor. And, oh no, I tell you what it was. He says, "Oh, I'm all right." It was Monday morning. He'd slept all day Sunday and all night long. And he says, "Oh, I'm all right, I'm all right." And I said, "No, you got to go to the doctor." "No, I'm going to go to work." So he got in his car, and he made it as far as the next town. And he carried his bag in that he, you know, showed people what he had, his whatever, his order book or whatever. And he almost passed out. So they said, "Hey, you're too sick to be on the road. You get home." So he turned around and came home, and I made him go to the doctor. So I remember he went to Dr. Griffin, and Dr. Griffin said, "Tell me about your symptoms. Tell me how you are." And Bob says, "Well, I don't know." He says, "I've never been so sick in my life," but he says, "My brain feels like lightning shooting out from it." He says, "You know, like you see a flash of lightning." He says, "I feel like in my brain, like there's flashes like that."
Mm.
And then he, you know, examined him all over, and he said, "I know what you have." But he says, "In order to be sure, I have to take you to the hospital." At that time, then, this was a new doctor in Dyersville after Patrick is born. And he took him over there, and he tapped his spine, and he said, "You've got encephalitis." You could tell by the fluid that he had encephalitis. Well, there wasn't anything to do for him except bed rest, you know, because the worst of it over. And at that same time, a friend of his that he went to high school in Austin, Minnesota, he got encephalitis. It must have been you know, that was a form of polio, encephalitis, that sleeping sickness. And the reason the doctor had a suspicion, there was a young fellow that ran a lumber yard there in Dyersville, and he was sick at the same time, and he had encephalitis. So he and Bob must have got it from the same, you know, they get it from mosquitoes or something like that, but they had the same thing. Well, he got over that, but he you know, it was a scare. I almost lost him. He could have slept away, and I wouldn't have known. You know, I took the kids and went to the carnival or whatever, and he was asleep. He wanted to just sleep.
Wow.
But anyway, getting back to it, then we moved to
Lancaster,
Wisconsin, and that's where Mary was born. And we had the doctor there. They didn't have a hospital there at the time. The doctor had a small hospital in connection with his office, and Mary was born there.
Who was the doctor? You remember? No, I guess it's not important. Do you remember the name of our street number? Cherry Lane, wasn't it?
308 East Cherry.
308 Cherry Street.
Cherry Street.
308 Cherry Street in Lancaster, Wisconsin. Well, then I had Mary, and then
Was it a
2
hard
years,
delivery?
was it 2 years later? We lived in a rented house there. Bob didn't want to buy a house in there because he wasn't going to be there long. He was going to be transferred to a territory closer in to Milwaukee. So he didn't want to buy a house there. So we were living in a rented house. And anyway, Patrick was taking a nap upstairs, and we were all downstairs in the yard talking, and instead of being in bed sleeping like he was supposed to, he was up there peeking out the window and listening to everything we were saying. And he leaned on the screen, and the screen gave away, and he fell out. But there was a big lilac bush right there. He fell on the lilac bush. He didn't get scared to death. I didn't have a car, didn't have any way. We loaded him on the wagon and we pulled him down to the doctor's office.
Was I alive then at the time?
Huh?
Was I alive?
No, you weren't born yet.
I wasn't born yet.
I don't know. You weren't. You might have been a baby. No, you weren't born yet.
We couldn't we couldn't have left. I know I was with you, and I mean, somebody had to carry, unless you carried Mary. But I think maybe Pat was in the wagon,
And then Georgie.
and Georgie and Mom and
Michael and I, we pulled Michael to the doctor's, or Patrick. The doctor checked him over and he wasn't hurt a bit. And Bob always said, well, that Irishman landed on that good German blockhead.
now
That's what saved him. And I guess that's what happened to me when I got the black eye, that blockhead.
What was Mary's? What was it like when Mary was born? I mean, we were living in that place on Cherry Street. Right?
Yeah.
It's her delivery. So what was her delivery like? Where was Dad at home or?
Well, he was on the road, but he got home in time to go to the hospital, and she was born there at that little hospital, and so was Timmy. Timmy was born, and I remember I was friends with Esther and Doc Becker were friends of ours, and she was expecting a baby the same time. She had 7 or 8 kids too. She had 7 children, and I went in labor and went up to this little hospital that the doctor had, because that's all they had in that small town. And I was in this one room, and pretty soon, Esther couldn't come up to see me because she was expecting any day now. So she sent me some flowers, and I talked to me on the phone, and she said, "Wow, 9 pounds and 6 ounces," or whatever it was that Timmy weighed.
Wow, he was a big boy.
Well, he was. Anyway, next day there was a lot of commotion and whatnot out in the hall. Pretty soon they opened up my room door and they wheeled Esther Becker in. And she had a 9 pound, 6 ounce boy too.
Oh.
And we were in the same room together.
Oh.
We always laughed about that. And we were friends. I've been writing to them for, how many years did we? It was 1959, and every
Timmy was
year
born in
I've written to her
55.
ever since. Every Christmas we all write back and forth. That's the only time we write.
Yeah, Timmy was born in 55. I was born in 53, Timmy was born in 55. I think we're like 18 months apart.
Yeah. So that's the story of that. But what happened, the reason how we ended up in Arizona, that story. 2 winters in a row, Bob was stuck in a snowbank.
In the car.
With his car, yes. He'd come home at night from work and get stuck because there were such big snowstorms. One time he slept in his car all night, and the thing of it is that there was a farm right there close, and he went up and knocked on the door, and he said he was always prepared. He took warm blankets and stuff in case anything ever happened to him when he was on the road, that he'd could keep warm. And so he went up and he knocked on the door and he said, I'm stuck out here in the snowbank and I know I can't make it back to Dyersville. That was when we were living in Dyersville that first time when he slept in his car. He said, I know I can't make it home. You mind if I call my wife and tell her? He says, I've got blankets and stuff like that. I can sleep in my car. He said when he's talking on the telephone, he could see in the mirror that the husband and wife, they didn't know him, that they were afraid. They were afraid to have him stay. And they halfway said, well, you can come in and sleep in here if you want. And Bob says he could see that they were afraid. And then they got to talking, they found out that here his mother and dad lived down the street from us in Dyersville. But still they didn't, I never ever forgave him that they didn't make him insist that he stay. And he said I could see they were afraid for me, that because they didn't know me, a stranger coming in their house. So he slept in his car, and he says the next morning, he said they probably didn't sleep all night worrying about me. They came out and they tapped on the car and asked him to come in, and they gave him some, and he says he about froze to death. I don't know how he did it. Well, anyway, he got home, he got pulled out of there, and then we moved to Lancaster, and the same thing happened there. That one time he had to walk with another guy who got stuck in the snowbank right after him. There were two of them. They were about 5 miles from, in a raging snowstorm. Those two walked into Lancaster, left their cars on the highway because they couldn't make it any farther where the roads were plugged. So Bob says, if I can make a living here, he said, we got to go to a warmer climate. He says 3 times and out. He says that's 2 times that's happened to me. So we drove that summer. We took a vacation and we went to Florida, and that's really the only big vacation we ever had. We took a vacation and went down to Florida, and we had a brand new station wagon, and the back seat, you face the back, I remember. And 2 or 3 of the kids sat there, and then between the back seat or the middle seat on that, there was a space, and we had a cooler Bob had made just to fit in there, and we iced it up, and we had all kinds of food in there, and that's the way we took that trip to Florida.
Remember the cereal where you pop the carton and pour the milk in it, and we ate right out of the box?
Yeah, and we had a good time. We saw all the way. We said, now we're going to see if we like Florida, and we'll move to Florida. Timmy was a baby, and all the neighbors and people wanted us to leave Timmy at home. He was 9 months old. And Bob says, no, if we go, everybody goes. Timmy goes too. So he went when he was 9 months old, and he was the best one of all. He was the best one of all. He never caused any trouble or anything. But
like the rest of you, what?
He never caused a minute's trouble.
It was fun with Bob in the car.
Yeah. Anyway, we'd stop along the way to eat, and the first night, the only time we ever did it, Bob drove for a while, and then I said, well, let me drive for a while, and you sleep. The kids were sleeping in the back, and the 2 of us took turns. Well, Bob woke up, and I'd gone around in circles. I ended up back where I was before. I lost my way. We didn't gain anything. He said, we'll never do that again. We could have had an accident with all those kids and, you being confused. So after that, we stayed at
Good job, Mom.
hotels and everything. So we got down to Florida. We said, we'll go. We took a certain amount of money down, and when the money's half gone, we'll turn around and come back. And that's what we did. We went down one side and came up the other, but we didn't go way, way down to the point of Florida, but we went over and then turned around, came back. And then we decided that Florida wasn't for us because everything was musty and muggy and hot. It was just terrible. So Bob came home, and he took a plane and flew out to Phoenix and to check and see if that was where we wanted to live. And so he got there, he liked it, and he went to the priest and he said, "Do you know a good Catholic realtor that I can trust?" And he lined him up with some guy, and that's how we ended up with that house on 52nd Parkway. He went in and he bought that house. Somebody had lived in it a year, and they just didn't, for some reason or other, didn't want to live out there. Didn't like the neighborhood or what, I don't know. But anyway, they sold that house to us, and it had 4 bedrooms and 2 full baths and 1 half bath off of the family room. And then a backyard, and the backyard fronted out into St. Vincent de Paul Parish. And see, all the people along that street were Catholic because they all wanted their kids to go to Catholic school. And it was right there. You just had to go out the gate and go to the...
See, was Danny born yet?
No, he wasn't
Yes,
born
Danny,
in Phoenix, was he?
Danny,
No,
Danny was
Wisconsin.
born in Lancaster, Wisconsin.
So we
He
didn't
was
know.
born, he was just a little baby, about 7 or 8 months old when we got, he was born in December January of 1958, and we moved to Arizona and landed there on the 4th of July of 1959, and that's how we ended up in Arizona. 1959, and Bobby, we had a big U-Haul thing that we loaded everything that we had that we wanted that was worthwhile. We had a sale, sold everything that wasn't, you know, just the good things. My bedroom set and dining room set were brand new. We took those, and washer and dryer, and
You had to leave your chairs behind her.
Oh,
I
remember
remember,
those
yeah,
chairs.
we
I remember
couldn't
that
get the
hurricane
chairs
lamp.
on, and at that time, those chairs were $25 a piece, and that was a lot for 1959. I remember we
They
paid
were
it.
pretty chairs.
But we had an auction, and we got $1 a piece for them. That's all we could get out of them.
And that,
You know, we should open the door. It's hotter than hell in here. Oh,
what I think is that, I remember that hurricane lamp, that neat
Oh,
hurricane
Bob,
lamp.
it's,
No, you stay right there. You stay right there, Grandma.
yeah.
I'll take care of you. You guys just keep talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, we need to turn on the air conditioner, it's hot in here. We'll open
You
the
want the
doors,
AC
why
or
not?
do you want the doors?
Open the front door
I
and
think
the
the
back door.
front door and the back door will be nice.
First things first.
In 1959, when did I start school? Didn't I start school in 60? 1960? Did I stay home for a whole year? If we got there in July of 1959,
That's when we arrived.
I think I started in September of 59 going to school.
You might have.
I know, I was 12 years old.
September of 59, how old would I have been if I was born in 53? 3 from 9 is 6, that's when I started. So I was
Right.
only home for a couple of months and I had to start school in 1959. Oh man, I never had any fun.
Little thing.
I had to go right into school.
So anyway, okay.
All right,
so
well-
where were we at now?
We're
in
we
Phoenix.
landed in Phoenix, Arizona on July, have you got it turned on?
Sure
I
is.
remember because I had my birthday on the road.
Yeah, we landed on the 4th of July. We drove into our driveway of our home there in Phoenix, Arizona. And
Marydale.
I tell you what, Bob thought it'd be easy to find a job. And right at that time, there was a depression or a very, very bad slump. People were buying homes for $100 down, those John F. Long's homes, just to get in. And they were living in them for a while. They couldn't find a job, and they were just going off and leaving them. And it was bad. Anyway, the job that he finally found was selling health insurance, and he hated it because he was so afraid, you know, that he'd sell a policy to somebody. He was so honest that, you know, that the company might not back him up on it or something like that. So he sold that health insurance for a while, and then down the street in one of those houses lived the Mosers, and the Mosers had seven kids, 7 boys.
6 boys and 1 little girl.
Yeah, they had 6 boys, I guess, at the time when we moved there. They had Carrie after that. But he worked for State Farm as an adjuster, and he kept trying to talk to Bob. He says, Bob, he said, Bob, first of all, he went to work for Franklin, Sun Life of Canada, that was it. Selling life insurance, that was it. And you know, that was a hard job. You know, Bob's idea was a night out to get me away from the kids, or to go along with him while he sold a life insurance policy and sit in the car, and sometimes he'd be in there for an hour or 2 hours, and I'd be sitting in the car. And he didn't understand why I just didn't love that I could get out and I could sit in the damn car for 2 hours. Well, anyway, that's what he did. Well, we managed to make a living, but not very much of a one, because that was a hard job. And so Harry Mosher said, Bob, he said, if you can sell life insurance, you should go to work for State Farm, because they have auto, life, health, fire, everything. He said, you can do so much better. Well, he applied, and they hired him. And I remember he started working. See, he had, you know, those little jobs just for, not too long. You know, those places, he went from one to the other. First health insurance, and then Sun Life of Canada. So he went there, I think.
Remember when he worked at Sears that time, trying to make
Oh
magazines?
yes, he was. He'd go after hours, you know, and he worked for grocery money there, and it was awful tough sledding, you know, because in Phoenix there were so many people selling insurance, and if somebody called up and wanted to buy some auto insurance or some insurance, they'd pass 10 State Farm agents before they got to Bob's office, so he'd have to run out to their houses in order to sell it. Well, then he had an office with 2 or 3 other agents to save expense, and I remember we got $250. They financed us until we got going, $250 a payday, and that out of that $250, that was twice a month, and we were supposed to run our office and everything with that. $500 is all.
And weren't the other guys ripping off his sales when they come in with one of the goldenrods?
Yeah,
they go.
Dad went out, worked. He'd go from all the parking lots, everything, drop off those goldenrods, have the kids pedal them.
He did too. All the kids did it too.
Yeah, you know, with his name on it, and they'd come into the office, and you know, they'd have that slip about the about the auto insurance, and whoever was there, they'd grab it, you know, even though it had Bob Duffy's name on there.
They took his business.
Well, whoever was in the office at that
That's not
time.
right. They came in and looked for Bob Duffy.
But then
They
anyway,
stole,
that's the way it was. So anyway, they had.
Steelers, I'd like to know who those other guys are.
We didn't talk about Timmy yet.
Oh yeah, we didn't.
We talked a little bit about Timmy.
Yeah,
we haven't talked
but
about
then
Danny
we
very
went
much.
to.
We didn't talk about Danny and Fran.
Okay, then Bob got the chance to go to Yuma. That they had.
We still haven't had Danny and Fran born yet.
Oh, we talked a little bit about Danny earlier.
They were
Anyway.
born a long before we even got there. Francis was born in Phoenix, and we were covered. He was working for Sun Life of Canada or whatever, and insurance covered that. You know, everything as soon as he was born, and anyway, that he would work there for them for a while, then he worked for State Farm. And then he had the opportunity of going to Yuma, Arizona as an agent for State Farm. And he started his office, and all he had was a card table, a table, the place that he rented in a motel.
I remember the Tropicana Motel.
The Tropicana Motel. It had a desk, not a desk, just a table in there. And he used that for a desk, and he had a filing cabinet that he had in his office in Phoenix, and he brought that. And that's how we started out in Yuma. And they gave him about, maybe 50 files, but most of them were dead files, people that, had been insured with State Farm and they went to somebody else or whatever. Anyway, he had to build up a business. Well, he finally moved from the Tropicana Motel down on 32nd Street, and it was just like it was out of town there. Remember that, how it was way
Right,
out
but I
there?
remember when he used to commute, he used to drive between Yuma and Phoenix, and he slept in the
he
Tropicana
did.
office.
Yes, he for a year and a half, we couldn't sell our house in Phoenix. It was a depression, a very bad recession at that time, and we couldn't sell our house. And every one of the neighbors, and I wouldn't stay here 5 minutes with 8 kids and without my husband and him coming home for weekends. I'd just leave that house and go. Well, we couldn't. We had paid quite a bit down on that house, money that we had saved and when we moved out from Wisconsin, and we didn't want to lose that. So we stayed there to try and sell it. Finally, after a year and a half, somebody bought that place. Some girl bought it. She had a job and she moved her whole family in there. And,
What year was that?
1967, I think, wasn't it? 67, 68.
No, it couldn't have been.
no, Mary, because we moved there in 1959, so it was 1963 about when we moved to Yuma.
No, it
No,
wasn't.
Mom, I
No
graduated
way.
from high school in 1964.
Yeah, it was
And then I
Maryvale High
went to
School.
2 years of college here.
Oh, well, when we left Yuma,
66.
Phoenix to move to Yuma,
Okay.
Ann was on her first year at the Phoenix College, and Georgie was just finishing her senior year at high school, and Michael had got out of the paratroopers, and he came home, and you remember he and Patty were married, and he bought that apartment or a condominium over in Tempe while he was going to school, and he could buy it with his government loan for being in service cheaper than he could rent a place. So he bought that nice new apartment. And you and Georgie lived with him for a while till you finished that year of school. She finished her senior year.
I went 2 years to Phoenix College.
And didn't you live with Mrs. Spoto too?
Yeah, you lived with her for a few months until Michael got a place.
Right, but the rest of you guys had already moved down to Yuma at that point.
Yeah, we were already moved to Yuma.
And so
And
that we moved to Yuma.
we rented a place while our house was being built, and
It was in Pecan Grove.
we lived in Pecan Grove for about, whatever it took to build a house. It must have been 8 months, and then we moved into our new house on
Magnolia?
Yeah, Magnolia Avenue, 1825 Magnolia. And then when we moved there, Ann and Georgie came and joined us. And Georgie went to Arizona Western College, and Ann got a job with Kelly Girl that was as a secretary, didn't you? And you drive out to the
Yuma
Proving
Proving
Ground.
Ground Aeronautical Company.
yeah, you worked for an aeronautical.
Ryan, they're the ones that built Lindbergh's plane.
Ryan, for the Ryan Aircraft, she was a secretary for those, and then
Was it
Well, where
top
did
So
you
we
go?
moved
Then
to
you-
Yuma to what year was it? It was 1966, wasn't it? No,
Sounds like
67.
it's probably 65.
No,
No, because.
No.
no, I know it wasn't 65. It was 66 or 67.
Okay.
It was 66.
Because I was 12 years old.
Katie was, Johnny was born in 68, so
Right.
I knew John for.
Well, we'd been in there in Yuma for about 3 years, or 2 or 3 years when you got married, I think. Yeah, because you got married when you were 21, I think you were. Anyway, that's
Yeah.
where the girls met their husbands. They were
Yeah. We
they
can
were
skip that
Marines out at the base.
part. We can skip that part. Let's see. did we-
Actually, either now or in a few minutes when I change this tape to the third tape, I kind of want to backtrack to a little bit more about Danny and Francis, if at all possible, and Timmy a little bit more too, because we
Yeah,
glossed over those three.
yeah.
Of course, the
Well,
narrative.
Danny and Francis, when he was born, Francis was born the year after we moved there. We moved there in 1959, and he was born in August of 1960, and we moved there in July of 59, and he was born in 1960. Well, I remember we had this place, and the backyard was fenced in, and it had, Bob thought that was great, that Danny would never be able to get out. You know, a good place for him to play. We went out in the backyard after we turned him loose out there to play, and looked, and there he was climbing up that fence. He stuck one foot and went in the other, and was just going over the top when he caught him. He was just a year old, and you couldn't keep him in. And he'd get up wake up in the morning and go over to Check's to visit. He'd walk right in, he'd knock, he wouldn't even knock. It was
Go
just
get
like
in bed
his
with
second
Susie.
hose. He'd go right across, and he probably had breakfast with them. Their breakfast was probably better than what he got at home. And anyway, he'd go over there and Mrs. Chuck says, that Danny, he comes over here every day. And I said, well, why in the heck don't you lock your doors so he can't get in? If you lock his door, nobody locked their doors in those days.
Weird.
No, I'm serious.
Wow.
We'd go off and go all over Phoenix visiting and shopping and whatnot. We wouldn't think of locking our door. Nobody stole anything from you. There wasn't like it is now. That was in 1959 or 60.
Wow.
Oh,
I
that's...
remember they left me on the merry-go-round, you guys.
Yeah, Mary will never let me forget
And
that.
all the way home.
I took the bunch of kids in my station wagon and took them to a store that had one of those, bunch of rides that they bring to a store or a parking lot.
Grand opening, we got hot dogs. too.
Yeah, you could get free stuff and whatnot, and free rides on the merry-go-round and whatnot. So I loaded all the kids and the neighbor kids and took them over there. And I said, well, is everybody in? Is everybody here? And they said, yeah, everybody's here. And as I drove out, I looked, and there I saw Mary, scared to death, going around and around on the
No,
airplane.
she got all the way home.
No, I didn't.
You got all the way
No,
home.
I didn't. Mary,
Yes, you
you're
did.
saying I did,
No,
but I
you got
didn't.
all the way home. She abandoned
did.
me.
I remember that I saw her there, and I turned around and came back. I said, well, how come you kids said everybody was in here, and here Mary wasn't in here?
There were so many kids we didn't know what to do.
Oh, gosh, yeah, it's like the old woman that lived in a shoe. She had so many kids, she didn't know what to do. She didn't know
I
how.
remember Ann and George used to tell me scary stories when I was a little kid, and they'd always say, they had one too many kids, and, they had too many kids, and they took her out to the woods and left her because they had too many. And I thought, oh, they're leaving me. They got too many kids, they're leaving me. I thought,
No way would we leave you. Oh, no.
You did.
Anyway, that's the story.
I
We
forgive you,
finally
though.
sold our house and moved to Yuma then.
And dear little Francis, wasn't he a little sweetheart?
Well, Francis, God bless his heart, he was born with a cleft lip and palate, and it was just the most devastating thing in my life.
But he was by far the cutest kid.
He
was the cutest baby.
Adorable, sweet baby. And you know what? The insurance covered everything. We thought, what in the world were we going to do? And the doctor that delivered him you know, called us in in the hospital, into one of the rooms, and to talk to us about his operations and so forth. And he said, you know, he said, anybody with 8 kids, he said, we have a wonderful facility. All the doctors do certain number of operations for free. You know, just that you're certainly with 8 children would be entitled to that. Bob looked at him, he says, no, he says, don't worry about it, we can pay for it, we got wonderful insurance. You know, we're insured with State Farm, and he's covered the minute he's born. And so, or whatever, Sun Life of Canada, whatever which one we were with, I guess it was Sun Life of Canada. When he had his palate operation when he was 2 years old, they had to wait that long that he didn't have the palate. They waited in those days a certain length of time, and the way this doctor did it, we said, no, you line us up with the best doctor there is in Phoenix here. We want him to do the operation on Francis's mouth, and he did the operation on his mouth, you know, the whole thing.
Dr. Lawrence.
His name was Dr. Lawrence. People came from all over, and he did a beautiful job on it. He never brought that baby home until his mouth was fixed. The kids never saw him, you know, how he looked or
Oh, he was so cute.
Yeah, and
He's
then
really a cute kid.
and
Yeah.
then
Looks a lot like Ryan.
Yeah, he does.
Ryan looks a lot like.
yeah, he was the best little kid, and Ann was just like a second mother to him.
Yeah,
He and
sure.
Georgie, they
Remember
took
Ann
good
worked
care
at Malcolm's? Ann worked at Malcolm's, and she worked for the McShanes. She was the babysitter.
She earned money babysitting, and I remember, well, I tell you, there were lots of times there in Phoenix before we moved to, when we moved to Yuma, it was like everything opened up. We never, you know, never were hard up. We didn't have a lot of money while he was building his business, but it was just like a difference in night and day because, you know, he was there with me, and we didn't have to pay for, you know, him driving back and forth and all this and that. We were all together now. And so from that time on, it was just like up. As soon as that house was sold and we got there, he just went. He was a hard worker, and he built up a big business there in Yuma. And Dad was one of always one in the top 10 in the whole state of Arizona as far as selling car insurance and like that. He didn't sell a lot of life insurance. He sold a lot of car insurance and stuff. So that's the story there. Well then, he lived to, it was 1975, our dear little Timmy died. He was killed in a car accident. God was good, he could have taken all 3 of our kids. Somebody ran a stop sign.
Some cop, drunk cop.
It was a policeman that he'd been out, and they'd been out drinking or whatever. They
There were
were
beer cans
in a
all over
a Jeep car. Well, anyway, he hit broadsided the car. Mary had come home for the weekend over Memorial Day, and Pat came home from Flagstaff. He was going to go to summer school or something. He was going to stay up there. He came home because Mary was home. So he and Timmy and Mary went for a drive of the car, and that's when he was killed. And it was over the Memorial Day weekend in 1975. Well, Bob never got over Timmy being killed. Never got over it. He had to go out to the cemetery every single Sunday and kneel by his grave and say a prayer. It wasn't Sunday if he didn't go out there. So we always would go after church on Sunday and kneel by his grave and say a prayer, and that was it. He never got over it. And he died in 1981. He had a lung, I think he must have had a valley fever or something that destroyed his lungs. Something destroyed his lungs.
I think it was, he used to get up in the morning and walk.
I gotta change tapes one more
Oh,
time,
okay.
so hold that thought.